Programs on religion and imagination focus on the arts. It is our special pleasure tonight here at the St. Jerome Center for Catholic Experience to welcome Mr. Brian Moore, a novelist of international stature. Mr. Moore has been in Canada for the last little while on tour, talking largely about Code Heaven, but his most recent novel, but he has consented very graciously to be part of our series and to talk about religion and imagination, his own fiction, autobiography, Ireland, all these matters. And he's decided on a format which I think will be quite serviceable, especially for a fairly informal crowd as we have tonight. And he will speak for approximately 30 to 40 minutes, and then he will entertain questions from the floor. We'll have coffee provided within the next 45 minutes, so if we have a coffee break, we can bring our coffee back into the hall with us here. Brian Moore is the author of many novels, many of which have been filmed. In addition to his work as a novelist, his work as a journalist, as a reporter, he's also a screenwriter for film and for television. He has a very interesting series that he's been working on for French television and American television, translation to the screen of a work by Simone de Beauvoir. He's told me also some interesting things about the next novel in process, which might well come up in the course of his talk this evening. At least I think it will. And if it doesn't, I'm sure either I or Dr. Letson will bring it up. And we can have some discussion about that, because I think it's particularly apposite. He's the author of, I said, a good number of works, including I Am Mary Dunn, The Mangan Inheritance, the controversial Catholics, which has also been filmed, Code Heaven, his most recent work, the Great Victorian Collection, and others. I'm very pleased tonight, on behalf of St. Jerome's, and indeed the St. Jerome Center, to welcome Mr. Brian Moore.
Can you all hear me now? My voice, I should have this at home, I'd be a much more powerful speaker. I'm one of those people, when I answer the telephone, people always think it's my wife. So this is perhaps become a stable part of my equipment from now on. I'm here under false pretenses because when McClellan and Stewart asked me to come here, they, in their usual vague way, did not explain that I was coming to discuss this. And so I feel quite nervous, and as I said, I'm here under false pretenses, because I said, when I got here, I said, well, what, me? Because I don't think of myself as a religious writer. I don't even think of myself as an anti-religious writer. But I did think, after a few minutes' reflection, you can't run away from it, because while I'm not a religious writer, religion, and the Catholic religion, has played a major role in many of my novels, and why not? I think it's mainly because in my novels I use religion as a metaphor for something else, for something which has always been at the core of my interest, and that is the question of belief. What we believe in. What is it that keeps us going? What is it that helps us forget that we don't know why we're here on earth, or what purpose our lives serve? To write about questions of belief isn't the same thing as to write about religion, because religion implies belief in some sort of deity and in a system of worship. But the belief which interests many people may not be religious. It may be a belief in revolution, in saving one's country. It may be a belief in nuclear disarmament. It may be in helping others less fortunate. It may be a belief in love. But whatever it is, it's something that sustains us against the terrible fact that our lives do not seem to have any meaning. I think this need, the need to believe in something more than making money and raising a family and having a house in Rosedale, is central in many, many people's lives. And as a novelist, I've always wanted to write about it, and I have on many occasions written about it. So when I say that I use religion as a metaphor in my novels, I mean that I use the loss of faith, loss of religious faith, often as a metaphor for that large crisis in our lives, a crisis which affects us all. That time when we realize that we no longer believe in the things we once cared passionately about, and sometimes also that the things we once did not believe in may now turn out to be true. So, I'm not writing about religion as a religious writer or an anti-religious writer. I believe, as Graham Greene said, that faith is a gift from God, and it was a gift which I felt from an early age, as I will later explain, was not given to me. However, this wasn't always the case with me. As a child, I was brought up by very devout parents in Ireland, and in a very religious manner. But early in my childhood, I became filled with a secret guilt. You see, like many sensitive children in my era, I couldn't face the act of going to confession, going into a dark box in a church and telling my sins to an unknown grown-up behind the grill, who would reprove me and give me a penance and then release me. The thought of having to blurt out secret sexual thoughts and desires appalled me, and so very early on I began to hold back these sins in confession and tell others, which seemed a little more palatable. And of course, not to tell your sins in confession in my day, I don't know what it's like today, was one of the greatest sins of all. And so very early in life, I think about the age of 8, I became a major sinner in my own eyes. So great a sinner that, like many children in my position of guilt, I took the only way out. The only way which seemed to be left to me, I stopped believing. I said to myself, God, heaven and hell, eternal damnation, it was all too frightening to contemplate, and so I began to try not to contemplate it. But since I was still a child, and because I loved my parents and feared them, I lacked the courage to tell them my true feelings. And so in the years of my childhood and adolescence, I was living a lie, pretending belief. I really think that's why I stand before you tonight as a Canadian. I wanted to escape my parents and their religion. I wanted to get away. And so as soon as I could, I did get away, far away, to North Africa in World War II. And from the day I left, I have never gone to Mass or taken the sacraments. I ceased to pretend to be a Catholic on that day long ago when I went off to war. And so, when years later, after experiencing the great events of my generation, I was in World War II, I was in Poland, I saw the death camps at Auschwitz, I traveled a great deal. I saw all the things which an Irish boy of my generation needed to see to become a writer. But when I finally sat down to write, to my amazement, I didn't write about those things. I felt that I had been a spectator at those events. I discovered in writing my first novel that the material of my novels was my early life, was what had happened to me in my early life. So I sat down to write The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn. But while I wanted to write a novel about loss of belief, of course I was sitting there terrified by the fact that Joyce had done it a lot better than I could in The Port of the Arts as a young man, and this would be another Bildungsroman which would fail. So I decided that I didn't want to do it, partly from timidity and shyness, but also because I felt that if I couldn't compete with Joyce, at least I could have someone else lose their faith, someone who I could feel intellectually superior to, somebody like one of my mother's friends, the Sodality lady. What if the Sodality lady lost her faith? I mean, that would be something I could probably deal with without getting into too many deep theological thoughts. And so I chose to write about a person as unlike me as possible, a middle-aged, very religious, very credulous spinster who loses her faith. She's a foolish woman who all her life has prayed that God will send her a husband, and who, when it seems too late, suddenly meets a man and decides he's Mr. Right, sent by God. She makes a horrible mistake, for he doesn't think of her at all in this way, but merely as someone who will back him in a business venture. And so my first novel dealt with this theme. The thing she has believed in, the belief which has kept her going during her lonely, empty life, is suddenly taken away, and she is forced to re-examine everything in her life, even her belief in God. I would like to just read you from the book that moment which first came, the first moment when the affair starts to go badly, and as she would do and always had done, she turns to prayer to help her out, and goes into a church one evening hoping to say a rosary or to do something which would still the agitation she feels. And she goes into the church, and the church is empty. There's no one else in the church but herself. Behind the altar, an old sacristan appeared, a minor mummer on God's stage. Perfunctorily he paused, genuflected in front of the tabernacle, then mounted the altar steps. His old eyes sought the tabernacle, dismissed it, and he went wearily around the back of the altar. She heard him fumble with the switch, and the lights in the side aisles went out. Then he came around the front again, walked down the steps, and opened the little gate at the communion rail. He did not genuflect, but walked straight down the main aisle. "Closing now, closing," he said in an angry voice as he passed her bench. But she sat stiffly, terrified by the thing she had felt. For when the lights went out, it seemed as though the tabernacle were empty, a little golden house set in the middle of a huge mantelpiece. It was as though the old sacristan, keeper of secrets, knew he had no need to genuflect again. The lights were out, the people had gone home, the church was closing. In the tabernacle there was no God, only round wafers of unleavened bread. She had prayed to bread. The great ceremonial of the Mass, the singing, the incense, the benedictions. What if it was show, all useless show? What if it meant nothing? Nothing. It's from this initial moment of doubt that her whole set of beliefs begins to crumble. This moment that forces her to re-examine everything in her life. Her closest friendships, her friendships with the family, the O'Neills, which seemed so close. Now, I want to also read you a little bit about that. Here in a painful scene, with her world crumbling around her, she's a bit tipsy. It's early in the morning. She feels that her world is ending. And one of the beliefs which happens when we lose our central belief, our other beliefs crumble too. That's what I wanted to show here. One of her most cherished ideals was that the O'Neills, who are a professor and his wife and their children, are her dearest friends, and look on her as sort of Aunt Judith and a great friend. So she goes around to see Mrs. O'Neill, not knowing really what she wants to tell her. She wants to tell her that the romance it doesn't exist, and she's in a terrible state, and it's the end of her life. And she wants comfort, and it's morning, and she arrives at an awkward moment, and Mrs. O'Neill sees that she's tipsy and trying to prevent the children from seeing her in that state. "It's Miss Hearn, ma'am," Ellen said, coming back into the kitchen. Mrs. O'Neill closed the oven door and gently adjusted the gas. "Now what on earth brings her here?" she said, untying her apron. "And the children will be home for lunch in half an hour." She handed the apron to Ellen and went out of the kitchen, along the dark back corridor to the hall, where Miss Hearn waited, her red hat askew, her big bag clutched to her stomach. "Judy, dear, and how are you?" "Maura." Miss Hearn pecked at Mrs. O'Neill's cheek. "I know you must be busy, but I had to have a talk with you." Well, I swear she reeks like a booze factory, Mrs. O'Neill said to herself. Could it be possible? Squiffy? Better not let the children see her. I'd ask you to come up to the drawing room, Judy, but the fire's not lit. Let's go in here. She opened the dining room door. There's a stove in here, and it's nice and warm. We'll be alone, Miss Hearn says, looking around her in a frightened way. She sat down on one of the dining room chairs and put her bag at her feet. Mrs. O'Neill saw the neck of the gin bottle sticking out of the bag. Somehow it was like seeing Miss Hearn with her clothes undone. She did not dare look at her collar. Miss Hearn did not notice her gaff. She stared moodily at Mrs. O'Neill's arms, bare to the elbow with traces of flour on the skin. You were cooking, she said. I interrupted you. Oh, not at all, Mrs. O'Neill lied. Ellen can finish it as well as if I were there. It was all done anyway. I went to see Edie Marrinan this morning. Poor thing, she hardly knew me. Yes, poor Edie. I must go out and see her some day soon. It's such a long way out. Surely she didn't come here to talk about Edie Marrinan. Of course, if she's as tight as she looks, there's no telling. The poor soul, it's that disappointment about the Yank, the one she mentioned last Sunday. You have to feel sorry for her. I wanted to get some advice from Edie. Do you see, Miss Hearn said, but she was too sick. Oh, that's too bad, Judy. Was it something special? Miss Hearn put her head down on the table and began to sob. Her red hat rolled off. Mrs. O'Neill, embarrassed, picked it up. What is it, Judy, dear? But Miss Hearn did not raise her head. She covered her face with her elbows, and her shoulders shook with sobbing. I've come to you, she cried. You of all people. And I never liked you, Maura. That's the truth. I never liked you. In vino veritas, Mrs. O'Neill said to herself. But then for some reason she could not understand, she too felt as though she must cry. For after all, she thought, drunk or not, it must cost her something to say that to me, because now she can never pretend again. Well, Judy, I suppose you had your reasons. What can I do for you? Miss Hearn lifted her teary face from the shelter of her elbows. Her rouge was smeared into two blurred scars across the paleness of her cheeks. Maura, I've lost my faith, and I've left Camden Street, and I'm living in the Plaza Hotel, and everything's finished. Everything. But why, Judy, why? What am I doing with my life, I ask you? Miss Hearn cried loudly, leaning across the table and catching hold of Maura's bare arm. A single girl with no kin, what am I doing? Oh, Maura, you always were the lucky one. A husband and children around you. You'll never know what it was like to be me. Judy, dear, I know it must be hard at times, but just a little bit quieter, please, Judy. The children. But I have to say it. I have to tell somebody, and you've always been kind to me, inviting me here on Sundays. You'll never know what that meant to me, Maura, to come here and sit with a family and feel that I belonged here, that I was welcome. Do you know what I mean, Maura? Do you know what I mean? Only you didn't belong, you poor thing, Mrs. O'Neill thought. Yes, Judy, I think I know. And then just a few weeks ago I might have got married. Do you know how long I've waited to be married, Maura? Do you know how many long years, every one of them 12 long months? Well, I'll tell you, it's 20-odd years, Maura, if you count in the time I was 20. Oh, I know I didn't think about it all the time. When my aunt was ill, I gave up thinking about it for a while. But a woman never gives up, Maura, does she? Even when she's like me and knows it's impossible, she never gives up. There's always Mr. Right, Maura, only he changes as the years go by. At first he's tall, dark and handsome, a young man, Maura, and then you're not so young and he's middle-aged but still tall and handsome. And then there's moments when he's anybody who might be eligible. Oh, I've looked at all sorts of men I didn't even like, but that's not the end. That's not the worst of it. Her fingernails dug into the flesh of Maura's arm. She leaned forward across the table, her dark, nervous eyes filled with confessional zeal. No, I'm going to tell you the whole thing, Maura, the whole thing. because I have to tell it to somebody. Somebody must listen. That's not the worst when he's just anybody who might be eligible. You might as well forget about eligible men, because you're too late, you've missed your market. Then you're up for any offers, marked down goods. You're up for auction, a country auction, where the auctioneer stands up and says, "What am I bid?" And he starts off at a high price, saying what he'd like best. No offers. He says second best, no offers. Third, no offers. What am I bid more? And somebody comes along, laughable, and you take him, if you can get him. Because it's either that, or back on the shelf for you, back to your furnished room, and your prayers, and your hopes. It's that sort of moment of crisis, that sort of moment when your beliefs crumble, which I've used in my novels. And religion, I found, the loss of religion dramatizes that in a way which I don't think any other situation can. But probably the book of mine which people associate most directly with religion is the novella Catholics, which was made into a film and shown on television. I don't know if you saw it, starring Martin Sheen and Trevor Howard. It's set in the near future, and it concerns a small community of monks living on an island in the west of Ireland. Rome, the very up-to-date Rome of the future, finds out that these monks are still celebrating the old Latin Mass. And because of that, people are coming from all over the world to the island, people caught up in a nostalgia for the past and its rituals. Rome, for complicated political reasons, wants to put a stop to this and sends a troubleshooting young American priest to get the abbot and his monks to toe the official line. When the troubleshooter arrives on the island, he at once encounters the monks' animosity. They believe that they are simply serving God in the best way possible because their celebration of the old Mass is bringing thousands of people back into the church. The abbot, a senior figure, seems at first to be a tower of faith and someone the American troubleshooter will have difficulty in bringing into line. But as the novella proceeds, we discover that the abbot, far from being a devout priest, is a man racked by doubt, a man who discovered some years ago that he had lost his faith, but who, having spent his life in the service of his fellow monks and the service of God, now finds himself, despite his loss of faith, unable to envisage life outside the monastic community. And so he is kept silent, and it is only when he is confronted with the possibly mutinous behavior threatened by his monks who will not give up the old Mass that he is forced to re-examine his stand and again face his terrible dilemma. Here in a passage we enter his mind as he reveals what it was which caused him to lose faith in his beliefs. His problem, as you will see, is one of loss of religious faith, but I hope it stands for something more than that, for the dilemma which faces all of us when we come to realize that the things we once thought were true, we no longer believe in, be they political ideals, religious ideals, or even our ideals about ourselves. The mutinous monks have tried to have a vigil on the island in honor of Our Lady. The abbot has told them all that they're not to do this and go to bed because there's a visitor in the house. He comes in and he dismisses them. He sends them all off to bed, and he is left alone in the church after the other monks go out. A dark church, the flickering oil flame of the sanctuary light over the altar, the gutter of one fat 5-day candle beneath a small shrine to Our Lady. The abbot genuflected from habit as he faced the chancel, then sat down heavily on one of the benches near Our Lady's shrine, looked at the candle beneath the shrine. Father Donald lit that. Every year Father Donald's old mother sent him a little money to buy things like warm gloves and mufflers. Every year he spent it in candles lit before Our Lady's shrine. In time of trouble, candles as at Lourdes. Lourdes is no longer in operation, the abbot's visitor had said tonight. Lourdes, that sad and dreadful place. The abbot thought of his own visit to Lourdes, remembering the thousands and thousands of bank candles in the grotto where the Virgin was supposed to have appeared to an illiterate French girl. With 4 other priests he had arrived on a pilgrimage excursion, and on the first morning visited the shrine to see the myriad crutches and trusses hung on the grotto wall, the medical bureau with its certifications of quote miraculous cures, the tawdry religious supermarkets crammed with rosaries and statuettes, the long lines of stretchers and wheelchairs in which lay the desperate and the ill, the stinking waters of the miraculous bathing pool. At noon the abbot fled to his hotel room, where, pleading dysentery, he shut himself up, seeing no one until it was time for the excursion train to leave. 2 days in that room, trying not to think of what he had seen, trying to say his prayers. It was not the first time. There had been moments before, sometimes hours, even days, where, back on Muck, or in some church on the mainland, the bad time had come on him, that time when, staring at the altar, he knew the hell of the metaphysicians, the hell of those deprived of God. When it came on him, he could not pray. Prayer seemed false or without any meaning at all. Then his trembling began, that fear and trembling which was a sort of purgatory, presaging the true hell to come, the hell of no feeling, that null, that void. A man wearing the habit of a religious, sitting in a building, staring at a table called an altar, on which there is a box called a tabernacle, and inside the tabernacle there is a chalice with a lid called a ciborium, and inside the ciborium are 12 round wafers of unleavened bread made by the sisters of Knock Convent, Knock, County Mayo. That is all that is there. That is all that is in the tabernacle in this building, which is said to be the house of God. And the man who sits facing the tabernacle is a man with the apt title of Prelatus Nullius, nobody's prelate, belonging to nobody, not God's abbot, although sometimes he tries to say the words, Our Father who art in heaven. But there is no Father in heaven. His name is not hallowed by these words. His kingdom will not come to he who sits and stares at the tabernacle, who, when he tries to pray, enters null, who, when in it, must remain from day to day, weeks becoming month, and sometimes, as after Lourdes, a year. Lourdes was the worst time. It was not the first, and it would not be the last, if he prayed. So the abbot avoided prayer. One could pretend to a preference for private devotions. One's Mass could be said alone. He no longer read his daily office. As for public prayers in a community like this, there were always others greedy to lead. Sometimes one had to say a grace. One said the words but did not pray. If one did not risk invoking God, one did not risk one's peace of mind. He was needed here. He did his work. He did his best, but did not pray. He had not prayed now for, well, he did not want to think. A long time, yes, some years. But I'd like to finish by saying that belief or lack of it, religious or otherwise, isn't always in my work an occasion for despair. I want to end now with a little story, one of the first I ever wrote and published, which deals with religious belief at a very early age. It's about how, when we were little children back in Ireland, we were forced to learn the Catechism off by heart, long before we understood it, and how this influenced us. In fact, it influenced some of us to become, believe it or not, priests. It's called a vocation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no. All things came from that beginning. No, don't do that, Joe, Mama said. No, not now, Joe, Daddy said. Then there was God. Who is God? The Catechism said, God is the creator and sovereign Lord of heaven and earth and of all things. You must learn your catechism by heart. The big words will be explained later when you go to school. God is everywhere, and he judges our most secret thoughts and actions, the catechism said. God will reward the good and punish the wicked. God doesn't like little boys who hit their sisters. God is good. God save us. God bless us. Merciful God, will you come away from that stove, Joe? No, you can't go out today. No, God bless us, what's the matter with you now? No, you can't have another apple. Oh, for God's sake, let the child alone. Then there was this world. The first word in the catechism was, question, who made the world? Answer, God. The world was Swedish shops, Alexandra Park, the Antrim Road, Royal Avenue, Newington School, Miss Casey's garden, and the big pond and the waterworks. All these things were part of Belfast, and Belfast was in Ireland. Dublin was in Ireland too. It was a whole day in the car to go to Dublin and come back. Then there was the next world. It was the only one that counted, Mama said. The next world was heaven and hell and purgatory. Question, what is purgatory? Answer, a state or place of punishment in the other life where some souls suffer for a time before they can go to heaven. And there was limbo for the babies who were not baptized. Mama sometimes declared to heaven. She declared that you would try the patience of a saint, let alone hers. In the next world, there was God the Father, and God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, who was a bird. But the Catechism said they are all one God, having but one and the same divine nature. Father Owen said it would be easier if you did not try to understand it now. I repeat, it will be easier later. Learn it now, and the sense will come. Know it by heart. Stop talking. In the next world, there was Our Lady, St. Patrick, St. Joseph, and there was the divine infant Jesus. You made him sad when you were bad. Good boys who said their prayers and did not try the patience of a saint would go to heaven, to the next world. It was the only one that counted. There was sin. It was an awful thing in the sight of God. Lies were sins. Losing your temper was a sin. Calling Mary a dirty pig was a sin. It was a sin to tell a lie. There was a song about that. It was a sin to steal Rory O'Hare's bike. That was a sin you got beaten for. It was a sin if you did not go to Mass on Sundays and holy days, but everybody went. Still, it was a mortal sin if you did not go. A mortal sin made the soul black and rotten in the sight of God. If you did not write that sin off by a good confession, you would be condemned to everlasting hell with the devil and all his fallen angels. There was impurity. That was the worst sin. That was what you did, impurity. Sins like murder and idolatry were only in books. The Catechism said that impurity was called all immodest looks, words, or actions, and everything that was contrary to chastity. It said all immodest plays, songs, discourses, novels, comedies were forbidden by the Sixth Commandment. It is sinful to join in them, it said, to encourage them or to be present at them. They were immediate occasions of sin, Father Owen said. And he said other immediate occasions were lascivious looks and touches, idleness, bad company, and whatever tends to inflame the passions. Learn it off by heart, he said. You could look up the words in the front of the lesson if you did not understand them. Father Owen said. All the fellows looked them up. Lascivious, immodest passions, bad inclinations, amusements, plays. Well, anyway, Father Owen said, impurity is a sin against the Holy Ghost. It blackens the soul. If Father Owens knew how impure those thoughts were, he would faint, so he would. It was the only sin the priests asked about in confession. How many times? You must promise me never to do that again. Will you promise me that? You will put these thoughts away, my child, won't you? Yes, Father, I will not sin. I am heartily sorry. I will not do it. No, that was impurity. There was your immortal soul. If you committed that sin again, you endangered your immortal soul. That is the only thing that counts. What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul? Remember, Joe, it's the next world that counts. You may think you're a big fellow in this world, but if you haven't made your peace with God, what does that matter? There was eternity. It was, the missioner said, something that the mind boggled at. It was the flames of hell for a time that was not time, forever. Our feeble intellects could not even begin to grasp how long that was. Consider that word, eternity. Keep it always before you. What, I repeat, what mean the follies, the pomps, the tiny triumphs of this world of ours? What do they mean in the light of eternity, of eternal damnation? Question. Is it sinful to have unchaste thoughts when there is no intention or desire to indulge them by any criminal actions? Answer. They are always very dangerous, and when entertained deliberately and with pleasure, may defy the soul like criminal actions. Now, since you have come to seek my advice in this matter, I'm going to ask you one question, Joe. You said your name was Joe, did you not? Very well. In school you probably learned your Christian's daily exercise by heart, did you not? Now, here's a question from these exercises. How should you finish the day? I should observe great modesty in going to bed, entertain myself with the thoughts of death, and endeavour to compose myself to rest at the foot of the cross and to give my last thoughts to my crucified Saviour. I see you have not forgotten your exercise. Very good. Now, tell me truthfully, did you think of those precepts the last time you went to bed? No, you did not. Now, promise me you will remember them in the future. Promise me true that you will pray to Our Lady for guidance when such thoughts come into your mind. You will not indulge in those thoughts again, I am sure. Go now, and remember to say a little prayer for me. There was Holy Communion. Tomorrow, when the retreat was over, they would all receive the body and blood of our blessed Lord. The rule of silence was ended. Every boy in school was in a state of grace. Keep those precepts in mind, the missioner said. Remember your last end. You may die tonight and face that end. You must always remain in the state of grace. What doth it profit a man if he gains the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul? The next world is the only one that counts, Joe. They were sitting on the edge of the cinder track on the far side of Big Field. The retreat was over. The rule of silence had been removed. Danny Boyle spat on his bare knee. He took out a dirty handkerchief and rubbed the spittle in to take the black dirt off. He pulled up his socks and stuck the hanky back in his pants pocket. He put the wind up me. But you know, there's something in what he says, though, about the next world and this one. Joe pulled a blade of grass off the bank and stuck it between his teeth. I know. All codding aside, Joe, it's the only thing that counts. I know. Sure, the best thing would be to die young. Say as young as 7. Then you'd be in the state of grace. But still, 7's the age of reason. 6 would be better. I'm 12, Joe said. Sure, that's not old. Just think the seniors have more sins than the likes of us. Even us, Joe said, we'd have to go to purgatory. Aye, but we're young. That wouldn't be such a long penance for you and me. If you live to be old, you can't help committing a whole lot more sins. Even so, even for us, purgatory would be long enough. Well, then, the best thing to do would be to join an order, as soon as you had your school leaving cert. If a fellow joined an order, he'd be praying morning, noon, and night. He'd have all his life to pile up indulgences against the time he'd have to spend in purgatory. So when you die an old man, you probably have hardly any time in purgatory at all. You'd go straight to heaven. You might. If a fellow was wise, that's what he'd do. After all, it's the next world that counts. That would be the best thing, Joe said, to be a priest. An order priest. It would be the safest. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, I'm intended to answer any questions you may have or clarify any comments or description and whatnot, but I think it might be our best bet to get our coffee and bring it back in here and have our discussion. Sure.
Nice and warm.
Hmm? Good. I think you, no, you better keep it.
Thank you, okay. Sure.